I have 43 books I really want to read this year, but I already know that there's no way I'm going to get to all of these books since I am incredibly busy with my masters, my reading schedule constantly changes, and many of these books are crazy thick. But nonetheless, let's talk about the books I really want to read in 2023, starting with some of my priority reads. Firstly, the Tournament Trilogy by Robb and Hobb, which is the third trilogy set in the realm of the Elderlings. I think I'm basically going to read one series set in this universe per year going forward. I read the Farsi Trilogy in 2021, and then I read the Live Ship Trader Trilogy last year, and this year I really want to read the Tournament Trilogy. The Live Ship Trader Trilogy was one of my favorite series I read last year, which cemented Robb and Hobb as one of my all-time favorite authors, which is why I'm so excited to get back to this world. If I understand it correctly, then this series returns to Fitz, which sounds incredible because I adore Fitz. I have very hopes that this trilogy will become one of my all-time favorites. Now moving on, I also want to finish the First Law series. Now I read 8 of the 10 books set in this universe, missing only Red Country and Sharp Ends. I actually started Red Country at the start of this year and I really enjoyed it, but I had to stop since my deadline at university totally overwhelmed me. So I think I'll actually put it down for now and pick it up in a month or two, but I just can't wait to read the missing books in the First Law universe. The First Law is one of my all-time favorite series. The humor is incredible, the characters are brilliant, yet horrifying, and Abercrombie just seems to understand humans ever so well. Now I've heard that Red Country and Sharp Ends are the weakest books in the series, but hopefully I'll feel differently about them. Then I also really want to read more of Cosmere by Brandon Sanderson. I want to continue the Stormlight archive with Oathbringer, and then I want to read at least a couple of the secret projects, which I didn't buy for monetary reasons, but I have heard so many amazing things about Oathbringer, and the new Cosmere books is also receiving lots of praise, so I just can't wait to read more Cosmere. And then I also have 2 quartets on my priority list. Firstly, I really want to start the Books of Babel by Josiah Bancroft, which is a series I have heard so many great things about, but the real appeal for me is that it sounds so weird, and I love when fantasy gets weird, and the world building I've heard is really unique, which makes me really excited. And yes, I know a lot of people didn't particularly love the last book in this quartet, but if I love the first 3 books in the series, then it'll still be worth it, and who knows, I might love the last book. Now the other quartet I really want to read is The Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. Now this series has been everywhere on BookTube last year, and after chatting with Ken Liu for my monthly Patreon interview a couple months ago, I really want to give it a read. The Dandelion Dynasty is an American-inspired fantasy, which is not something I've read, I think. Also, almost everyone who has read this series seems to love it, and I've heard that book 2 in the series is seriously epic. I mean, Patrick Leo even said that Walls of Storms is just as good as Words of Radiance, which is incredibly high praise. Now, all 4 books in this series are seriously chunky, so it'll definitely be a big commitment, but I am ready for it. And then I really want to read the Edan trilogy by my fellow booktuber and friend Philip Chase. Now, if you don't know who Philip Chase is, then he is one of my favorite booktubers, and he has been working on a trilogy for almost 20 years or something like that, and he will be releasing the whole trilogy this year. Now, I don't know anything about this series, but I know that Philip is an incredibly deep thinker, he's incredibly smart, and he has read a lot, especially fantasy, so I'm confident that this series will be amazing, and I just can't wait to get to it. Okay, now I'll get to some books and series I really want to read this year, but they're not as high of a priority. Firstly, I really want to give the Lycanius trilogy by James Islington or Islington a read. Now this series has been compared to The Wheel of Time a lot and has been praised for its incredible world building and complexity. Apparently this series gets incredibly complex, so I know Patrick Leo, for example, he recommends binge reading this series to ensure that you don't forget any details, so I really want to do that. However, binge reading a trilogy is not something I do that much, and these books are really chunky, but I literally own the Broken Binding special editions of this trilogy, which are signed and stuff, and I also adore the covers, so I really feel like I need to give this a read. Otherwise, I don't really know anything about the series and I'll be going totally blind into it. And then I have 2 sci-fi series on this list, and the first one is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. Everyone seems to love this series, and almost everyone swears I will love it as well, which I am actually expecting as well, and with books 6 and 7 coming out soon, I know this series will be all the rage, and I'll probably get FOMO, so I really need to read it. A lot of people say that the first book in the series, The The Red Rising is the weakest one, so I'll definitely give at least the first 2 books a read, but as I said, I really do expect to love this whole series. And then I also really want to read the Children of Time trilogy by Edan Tchaikovsky. I've only read 1 book by Tchaikovsky, which was Shards of Earth, which I didn't particularly enjoy. I was totally overwhelmed by the complexity of it, but I've heard the Children of Time is both easier to get into, and it also has spiders in space, which sounds amazing and horrifying. I also own the whole trilogy and just waiting for me on my shelf, so I really need to get to it. Tchaikovsky is one of those authors who writes just as much as Sanderson, but he doesn't get the same recognition, so I'm wondering maybe he's underrated, or maybe he just isn't as good. But at the moment I think I own 5 books by him, so I really need to read more of his work. Then I also really want to read Memory, Sorrow and Thorn by Tad Williams. From what I've heard, and this series will most likely be a series I will absolutely love. People say that Williams is one of the best authors in the game, and while the books are slow paced, I've heard the payoff investment is so worth it. And if I love the original quartet, then I know there are a ton more books set in the same universe that I can dive into, which is really exciting. And also, this is literally the series that inspired George R.R. Martin to write the Game of Thrones series, so I really feel like I need to read it. The Last War by Mike Shackle. Now this is a series that I've heard is criminally underrated and is an incredible grimdark trilogy apparently. Not that many people have read this one, but it seems that the people who have read it, they just can't stop talking about it, and I really want to read it for the sole reason that it seems to be a hidden gem. I love discovering underrated books, and I already own the first book in the series, so hopefully I'll get to it this year. Now moving on, I also really want to read The Ember Blade by Chris Wooding, a book I've had on my TBR for so long. Now the only reason why I haven't picked up this book is because book 2 didn't have a release date for so long, but book 2 is finally coming out this year, so I really don't have an excuse anymore. Now I've been told that this is a classic fantasy told with a modern voice, so that is really all I need to hear. Also, Murphy Napier and Patrick Leo loves this book, so that makes me fairly confident that I will love it as well. And then we have The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison, which is a fantasy standalone, which is quite rare in the genre. And from what I've heard, and it sounds like this book centers around trying to discover a murder, I think. And I also know that court politics is a big element in this book, and if you know me, you know I love fantasy that has great politics. I also recently got the Broken Binding edition, which looks amazing, so I definitely need to give it a read. Let's talk about some self-published books I really want to read this year. Now, I just want to make it clear, I am planning on reading more than just 2 books that are self-published this year, but these are the ones I'm most excited about. Firstly, Of War and Ruin by Ryan Cahill, book 3 in the Bound and Broken series. Now, this will actually be my next read since my Patreon voted for me to read it, and I'm actually really glad they voted for this one, because I am so excited to read it. Every book in the series has just been better than the previous one, and this is classic fantasy told with a modern voice at its best. You have dragons, you have elves, you have dwarves, and the scale is incredibly epic, and apparently Of War and Ruin is bigger than Words of Radiance, so it'll definitely take me a while to get through it, but I just can't wait to read it. Also, I recently interviewed Ryan Kyle for my monthly Patreon interview if you're interested. And just as I finished recording, I forgot to mention, I also really want to read The Children of Gods and Fighting Men by Shauna Lawless. My wife has read this book and she loved it, and I've also met Shauna in real life and she is such a lovely person. I have heard so many great things about this book, and I also want to read some more historical fantasy, so hopefully I'll love this book as well. Lastly, I really want to read Gunmetal Gods by Samil Akhtar. Now, Samil was kind enough to send me 3 of his books, and he recommended starting with Gunmetal Gods, a book I've heard so many great things about. I mean, Daniel Green read it last year and he loved it, and I know this book is described as a Lovecraftian horror set in a Middle Eastern setting. I mean, that just sounds incredible, and the title Gunmetal Gods is one of the most badass titles I've ever heard of. I am really excited to read this one, and I hope to get to it this year. So that is it. Which series do you think I should prioritize? And also, what are you most excited to read? As always, thank you so much for watching, and a special thanks to my patrons who support what I do here. I really appreciate it.